Welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel. In this video, we're going to continue talking about being a DM. In my last video, I talked about how I think it's not as difficult as people maybe are projecting that it is, and maybe that's part of the reason why there's less DMs. And I got a whole bunch of great feedback. Some agreed with me. Some said maybe I didn't give enough information. Some didn't agree with me. But in any case, we're going to move forward here, giving some generic advice. Because again, I think 90% of being a GM or dungeon master or keeper or administrator or, I'm trying to think of other words, referee, is the same, no matter what system you're running. Some of the mechanics are different, so of course, the games are going to run slightly different. But problems that some people seem to place with system, I don't think are really there. And we'll leave it at that for now. But let's start off by talking about a little terminology. I'm going to use the word scene in this, and I used it in my last one. I know some people don't like that because it feels too story-like or plot-like, but scene, I think, is easy for us to understand. A scene is a series of time, right, that's happening in a certain location. It could be traveling across a swamp. It could be an encounter in a dungeon room. It could be navigating through a maze or hallways. Those would be your scenes. And really, we have three reasons why we want to, or three reasons why there might be a scene, right? And not just hand waving it. One is that it drives the potential story forward. And when I say story, I'm talking about what's happening at the table. I don't believe in I don't believe in like in Santa Claus, but it's not my way of playing to have a preconceived story, but the story meaning what the characters are doing. So either this scene is meant to drive that forward, or maybe it's a breather because it was a very intense scene. So there might be some kind of downtime or a slower pace scene so that we can kind of catch our breath after a major combat or major conflict or heavy role play or something. And the third reason why we might want to have a scene is because it's just fun. You might want to play out at a tavern, drinking and the bard playing songs and all kinds of fun stuff like that, just around a campfire telling stories. Sometimes we want scenes like that because they're just fun. Not everything has to be move, move, move. Now, I know some people don't agree with me on that, and that's fine. Let me know in the comments below. So we're going to break down certain types of scenes, and then we're going to talk a little bit about dice rolling and stuff and mechanics as we move through. But let's talk about the most obvious word that's used a lot, and I'm going to use it in a very generic sense, which is encounter. Okay, so I'm going to say an encounter is not just with an intelligent being or an animal or a monster. An encounter is any time that the PCs are stopped and must make decisions or use their skills or the player skill or however you want to say it to solve a problem. When you are creating these encounters, one of the things I see people say a lot, which I absolutely do not like, is they'll say, well, I'm going to make a combat encounter, or I'm going to make a social encounter. This to me is not the way I approach things. I create a situation, as we talked about last time, or a problem. And this problem I shouldn't even necessarily have the answer written down, but it needs to be a problem that can be solved in many different ways. This is important. This is a backbone of how I run the game. Basically, they are marching through the woods. They come to a cliff. It's 500 feet down to a river below. There's a 100-foot cross and 100 feet open space to get across. How the characters get across is up to them. I don't have a way per se that they should get across. There might be a bridge there, but if there's a bridge there, that's not an encounter, right? The encounter is they get to the space and there's a choice to make, a choice that they'll need to use either some of their resources to overcome, their quick thinking, or character skills. That's an encounter to me. So I can't state enough that we don't want to pre-think what the PCs might do or maybe what they might do, but not what they will do. What we're going to do is set up a situation and let them do what they will. This is where, and we're going to get into dice rolling in a little bit, but this is where we need to use a little bit of logic. Because basically, we need to take whatever the people are saying at the table and decide what would be the logical end to this. Well, there's a 100-foot gap. Okay, well, my normal fighter type is going to run and try to jump it. Okay, so do you have some kind of special magic item or something? Or no, I'm just going to try to jump over a 100-foot gap. Do we really need to make a roll there? they're not going to be able to jump over the 100-foot cap. They're going to jump out. They're probably going to get pretty far if they're strong and maybe not wearing they're not heavily encumbered. And then they're just going to fall. And what's going to happen when they fall 300 feet? They're probably going to die, right? That's an awful long way to fall. There is a river down there. Maybe there's a chance to land in the river and be fine. You have to decide what's the logical thing. This is why the very classic, joke that passes around where the GM is like, do you really want to do that? This is where we want to use that. So, right, we need to think about this. Now, they might say, well, we're going to try to climb down, or we're going to look for signs of how somebody else may have crossed. These are things you may not have thought of. But then you have to just use logic of your world, what's been going on, what you're thinking. Well, you know what? People do cross this because they go to the other side because this is a path. So maybe there's a way across that's, oh, okay, well, you look down and you can actually see that there's a, kind of stone staircase cut into the side of the cliff and they get down. Let the players do their thing. I mean, maybe 100 foot is too far. Maybe you make it a 20-foot jump. So they probably couldn't jump 20 feet. But are there trees they could cut down? Could they throw a grapple across or, shoot an arrow, which, again, probably wouldn't really work. But, hey, it's D&D, right? Can we figure out a way? Can the magic user with a fly spell fly over their entire rope off? There's lots of different things that we could do or that the player characters could do, and that's up to them. You do not want to create situations where there's only one way, or that you necessarily are creating something that only a certain player character could do, and this is the only way they solve it. And I know that some people are screaming now and being, you have to highlight your characters. Okay, that's fine. But what if that person playing the magic user you were planning on having flying across the thing, it doesn't make that session? Or they use the spell earlier in the adventure because they find another use for it. What happens if they can't do the thing you thought they were going to do? They'll be stuck. So you need to leave things open. Okay, so let's go with the idea that there's a stairway cut in the side. Well, why didn't you mention that at first? Well, maybe it's partially hidden. Maybe they didn't look over the side. So you might want to use a skill check for that, or you might not. I mean, if somebody's looking down there, they're probably going to see it. And this is a very common thing, I think, that we find with newer people running games is that they use the mechanics of the game more often than they really need to. One thing we have to remember as referees is that the mechanics are there for certain situations, and we're going to get to that in a second. But really, most of the game is players telling you what their characters would do and you making the world react in a logical way. They walk into the tavern, they go up to the bar, and they say, I'd like to buy a tankard of ale. And you say it's a silver piece, and they say, I give them a silver piece, and they now have ale, right? We don't need to make any skill checks for that. We don't need to roll for that. Same thing with this situation. They come to the thing and they're just like, well, hold on, people come this way. We know people come this way. Well, is there a way down? Well, do you want to look over the side? Yeah, I'm gonna get to the edge and look over the side. Oh, okay, you see cut kind of a rough staircase in the side. It's going to be treacherous, but you think it's safe enough if you take your time. This is the kind of thing we can give them, right? And then now, what if they're being chased by a pack of wolves? Well, we have to run down the stairs because we can't take our time. Well, you're going to need to make some kind of skill check then. And this is where we get into mechanics. If they're taking their time, clearly people use these stairs. They can just make it unless you set up some kind of a hazard or trap or something on the way, which again is a whole other thing. So I will address one comment. I don't remember who gave it to, where they said, you got to know the player character's character sheets. Otherwise they'll thwart your plans or thwart your encounter. I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, I was making a very generic single encounter to kind of demonstrate what you could do. So obviously, if that was your entire plan for the night and a single spell or something thwarts it, well, I mean, maybe that's not going to be as fun. But of course, if there's more to your adventure than that, which there would be, then if they thwart it with the spell they have, then they thwart it. I almost never know what spells my players have their characters memorize. And I don't ask them. I trust that they're not going to just suddenly at the last minute be like, oh, yeah, no, I memorized that. I mean, many times to their credit, my players have been like, oh, I didn't memorize that today, because they like to play the game, right? That's part of playing the game. This idea that people are going to cheat or something, let them have what they have. If they have a spell and it thwarts what you were thinking, then that's fine. It just is what it is. And they move on and they were able to accomplish it and they used some of their resources. Cool. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the most probably talked about type of encounter, which is combat. Now, as I've said, I don't make combat encounters. I'm doing air quotes here, right? Because if I put 10 orcs guarding a room that maybe there's treasure behind, and the party is making their way through the dungeon, they don't necessarily have to go into that room and fight the orcs. There are lots of things they could do. there is a situation with not a single way to solve it, 10 orcs in a room, go beyond the room, treasure in the next room. How they solve that is up to them. Do they dimension door or misty step just past them without the orcs seeing them? Do they use invisibility? Do they distract the orcs? Do they walk in and offer them wine and make friends with them? What do they do? That is up to the player characters, and that's the story. And going back to what I was talking about before in the last video about suiting the experience to the player characters, that's how you do it. You make a situation where they can solve it any way they want, within logic, obviously. Okay, I'm going to get into a little bit more mechanical stuff here, but I'm still going to be kind of vague because I feel like the article that was originally written about the lack of DMs was for 5th edition. But I also mostly talk about older games here, although I have, since I have to throw my credit out there, I've run a over 3-year 5th edition campaign. I've run the game plenty of times. I understand how it works. So you don't need to tell me in the comments how 5th edition works. General ideas of combat. If you are unsure and you're new as a DM and you don't want to guarantee basically the party getting their butts kicked or killed or whatever, when you create an encounter in combat, follow these basic steps. I'll do OSR first, and then we'll do 5th edition. In an OSR type game, look at the total number of hit dice of the enemy. Never let that exceed the total number of hit dice of the player characters. That will keep the combat relatively neutral, like a 50-50, right? But, and this is super important, do not have more enemies than player characters at least active at one time. You could have a horde, but they might be pushed down the hallway or something. You might have a bunch of you could have like 3 or 4 5th level characters. Now you're talking like 20 hit dice. Well, if you put 100 skeletons, they're probably going to die, right? So you don't want to do that. The same is pretty much true for 5th edition. You don't want to have more bad guys than good guys, right? That's basically it. And the way you can work is they use something called CR. You add up all the levels in your party, divide that by 4. That should be right around where the CR is. So you have 4 first level characters. You divide that by 4. The CR should be 1. So a single CR 1 monster or up to 4 monsters that add up to a single CR should be basically an okay fight. And again, for the people that are going to come in and talk about high-level monsters and how it doesn't balance out, I'm talking to new DMs. Don't run a 10th level adventure. If you're brand new, run something 1st or 2nd level. Don't run a super high-level adventure. On low levels, this works pretty good both in OSR and in 5e. Yes, you can have a 5-hit die dragon and have 5 first-level characters, and that dragon can kill them all in one breath. Yes, I'm talking about OSR here. But, you know, that's how you learn, right? So it's not perfect, but that's a good kind of general rule. Okay, insofar as a process, whether you're playing an OSR game that explicitly is a procedural game, and I'm going to talk more about procedurals and narrative in another video, but whether you're playing that or you're playing, let's say, again, 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, where there's not necessarily a straight procedure, the game is a turn-based game. All you have to do is whenever you come into a scene, make sure that, and excluding combat, 'cause that's a little bit different, but make sure that you go around the entire table. This is the key. If you have 4 players and you walk into a room and they come into this room, there's some columns, there's a tapestry, there's an altar, there's another door, they're looking around, they're investigating. The first thing you do is you go around the table and you say, what are you doing? To the very first person. You can, whoever you want, however you want to do it. I usually go with my left. That's just how I do it. Okay, they tell you, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And now everyone is involved in the scene. And then you can narrate back the process of what happens. This also helps with problems like the first person says, I'm going to go over and check that chest. And then when they open it, a trap goes off and we don't know where anybody else is because you just followed through that one person. There's a temptation to do that. But what you want to do is think about the game is a turn-based. And once around the table is a turn. DM starts and defines what's in the room. We ask everybody what they're doing. DM explains results of that, then goes around the room again. And this is how we work our way through the game until we get to combat. And that uses, of course, a little bit of a different rule because that has initiative and such. Now, OSR games are exactly the same. Come into the space. What are you going to do? I'm going to do this, 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 this. Okay, we roll dice. We decide what's going to go on, or we just logically figure it out. Both games run exactly the same. Okay, let's talk rolling dice, because this is always a big one. When do we roll dice? As I mentioned before, I find that newer game masters, in fact, even me sometimes, I've been doing this a long time, ask for way too many rolls. What we should be doing most of the time is not rolling dice. We should be explaining what's happening in the world, and the players should be explaining what their characters are doing to react to it, and then the world should react back. So you go into a space, again, this room that I described, one of the players goes up to the altar, one goes to the door to listen, one looks behind the tapestry, one reads the columns. Okay, cool. You're reading those columns here. What languages do you speak? Oh, you speak Elvish? Okay, cool. You can read this. There's some Elvish script here. It says blah, blah, blah. You go to the altar. Oh, you're a cleric, right? Okay, so you've got some knowledge in this. You understand that this altar here was used to sacrifice to the sun god. Oh, you check behind the tapestry. You see a concealed door back there. You're over there at the other door listening. Here you might roll, right? That would make sense. You hear footsteps coming. What does everybody do? Now we move on to the next turn. Okay? Same process no matter what system you're using. You're going around. Eventually, dice might need to be rolled. Let's say, for instance, you look at that column. What language did you speak? Oh, okay, you don't speak the right language, but let me see. Maybe you can pick up some words from it from your adventuring. We'll make an intelligence check or knowledge check or whatever that might be. Or maybe they have a spell that allows them to read it, right? So we'll make some kind of check here. Now we're using the rules of the game. Okay, you're checking out the altar? All right, well, you check it out. You can tell it's basically a sacrificial altar. What god is it for? What god do you worship? Yeah, you probably wouldn't know much about this. You can roll a religion check. Okay? You look behind the tapestry, you see the door. No check there, right? You listen at the door, roll a hear noise check, right? This is how we use the dice. If we feel like it needs a roll because a mechanic calls for it. Now, why would we roll? What's the difference about these situations? Number one, anything that you're rolling for should have an interesting result if they fail. That is, if they read the column, if they can't read the columns, they don't know that they're supposed to speak these certain words before they pick up something off the altar, then maybe it sets off a trap, right? So failure to read the column means trap at the altar. At the altar, they don't realize it's a sacrificial altar. They might not put the coins inside the thing, right? Or know how it would work. So again, they might set up the trap, or maybe they set up an alarm. Maybe giving a sacrifice at the altar is what opens the concealed door because they see the door back there, but maybe there's no way to open it. Now, of course, a knock spell, using a chisel, there's lots of ways the players can do it. You're not setting one way to do it, but you are setting in place a setup, right? They fail to hear the footsteps coming down the hallway. Well, they might be surprised when the enemy come into the room and see them raiding their space. So we're only doing checks where the failure might be interesting. And again, when I say interesting, I mean to the overall story that is being told at the table together. This is the important part. The player characters are the stars of the TV show or the movie or the book or the comic book or whatever, how you want to look at it. You compare them in that same way. They are the stars. If reading that column has no bearing on anything that they're doing, it's fine. You don't even need to roll for it. If you just want to tell them, it could be good flavor. If you just want to set flavor up. I would not even put writing there at all, though, if it wasn't, that was hard to read anyways, that if it wasn't relevant, because you will find situations where the player characters can't read it. And then they're thinking, well, hold on, we're stuck because we need to read this, and we get paranoid. Although smart players will make rubbings of it or copy it and then check it out later. One thing maybe this is another video. One thing I've noticed with a lot of new players, and this is true of new DMs as well, is that they never think about coming back. There's so much of this 5-room dungeon idea where everything's just you go there once, you solve your thing, you go there once, that people find it odd when they reach a spot they can't move forward, and it feels off to them. I recommend getting that out of your system early on because I think that creates a much more interesting world where you might remember something and have to come back to it. But again, that's another video. So I'm going to mention one other thing. If you are going to have them roll the dice, make it matter. And what I mean by that is, get ready. Don't fudge the dice. Don't change the dice rolls. Just don't roll if you already know the solution. If you want them to read that column, just let them do it. If you want them to know it's a sacrificial altar, just let them do it. If you want them to hear through the door because that's important for you, just let them do it. Don't roll, have them fail, and then go, oh no, you succeed. What's the point of that? I'm sure you'll tell me in the comments below. Well, I hope this was helpful. I'm not making light of being a DM by any means. Obviously, I run tons of games. I think it's super fun. And I do understand that it is work. But I do think, and I stick by my first feeling, even though I was told that I wasn't being sensitive, that if you love being a DM, then this isn't hard work for you. It's something you enjoy. It's fun. If it's a lot for you to create an adventure, but you still love doing it, but after you're exhausted and you're just like, then don't run an adventure every week. Run one every other week or once a month. Just run when you feel like it. It should be fun. This is a game. We want to enjoy it. It's not stressful. You shouldn't be worried about it. It's just a game. A great game. My favorite game. A game I love, but just a game. Get out there, run some games. Try. Let your friends know that you're new at it. Let them know that you're all learning together. Let them know there might be mistakes. They're not going to care as much as you think they will. I hope these tips will help some people. If you would like to talk more about RPGs and the like, join my Discord. There's a link in the show notes. You can join over there. I got a great group of people over there constantly talking and giving advice about designing games, designing adventures, and just RPG stuff in general. If you want to support the channel, you can find a link to my Patreon there as well. And in any case, I'll see you next week.